Okay. Okay. I hope that you can see the presentation. So today's, I'll be talking about the continuing session 2 of the creativity series. And this will be called the Unified Self Leaves Clues. And this is to support the curriculum review and just to give us ideas for reflection and discussion in order to aid the process. If you were here with me last week, we talked about searching for the unified self. And we talked about what this unified self means and why it's important. We used illustration by Arabo Amokbai, a piece of art. It's on the top left corner, called Yin and Yang. And we use this art to exemplify what we mean by unified force. It's when we have different parts of ourselves, our different skills, our different talents that we normally tend to separate. When we decide to bring them all together, we're able to bring all our skills to bear on a task. And we wonder, why are we having this conversation now? Why are we reviewing this curriculum? We know that we have so much exposure to learning, and we know that we are more divided than ever before. We have the opportunity to learn every single thing we wish under the sun. If we want to become a DJ, we give ourselves a week on YouTube and we start the process. If we want to start a business, we give ourselves 2 weeks on Instagram and we start the process. So we have so many opportunities to make a lot out of ourselves, and we learn a lot, we diversify, but we also have the opportunities to distract ourselves. So, but the more we integrate these separate parts of ourselves, the better chance we have of actually being forceful in our achieving our goals, forceful in our scientific life. And this series is designed for academic students, and not just students at the College of Medicine, but also lifelong students, because we're all continuously learning, but also for the assessors to begin to see it, how they can begin to look at the totality of a student in a unified way, and how looking at a student as a unified person with multiple, sometimes contradictory interests can actually help in getting the best out of students academically. So last week we looked at this, we talked about the message, and we looked at these 4 people, and we had a bit of a discussion about what we would do if we were personal assistants to each of these 4 people. We know that we would not give them the messages in the same way. We know that the way we convey our message will differ. Some will prefer our information written, some will prefer auditory methods, some will prefer graphs and charts, some will prefer things written out. The most important thing is that as a personal assistant to any of these famous people, we would want to pass the message across. So the way we communicate with the dignified socialite is different from the way we communicate with the flamboyant artist. Once the message is more important than the messenger, then we realize that we must adapt. The only reason why we stay the same is when we consider the messenger to be more important than the message. But when the academic learning and when the development of the whole self is the most important thing, then we know that adaptation to our techniques and our methods must continually evolve in order to ensure that this message is being passed across. So we're going through 6 sessions on creativity, and it has 6 sessions with 12 ideas, and there is only one method to get all these ideas through. And we talked about the first 2 ideas in the last session. The first one is talking about what creativity actually is, and creativity is simply perception. It is simply the ability to see. It's the ability to see different things around us, to see connections, to make associations between things. And when we think of creativity, we think of something outwards, external. We think of writing a poem. We think of drawing something. And stereotypically, we are tuned to thinking that creativity is outward. But my idea is that creativity must first be turned inward. And the single method for all of these 12 ideas that I'm going to go throughout the series is by paying attention. By paying attention is the way in which we begin to note things about ourselves, perceive things about ourselves, see things inward about ourselves. So the third idea that we're going to talk about today is to look for the common thread. So on the top hand, you'll see this tapestry actually on the top. And when we look underneath the weft, we see that there's actually a there's a singular thread that goes throughout the fabric, both horizontally, vertically, diagonally. There is an order to it. There is a thread that matches, that brings all these different colors together, brings the different patterns together, brings the different shapes together. So we refer to this literature usually as themes. So there is a theme. So there are themes, just as there are themes to a novel, there are themes to a movie. Sometimes if we look carefully, we can begin to find themes for our life. And these themes actually can help us to bring the different parts of ourselves together. So the topic for today is about the unified self leaves clues. So the clues are left in the intersection between the different ideas and interests that we have. Now that might seem a bit complicated. I'll go to that in the next slide that we have. When we have different parts of ourselves, different hobbies, we have a profession in the sciences and we have an inclination towards a hobby in art or something else. And when we bring these things together, just like the yin and yang painting, we find that in the place where those two things join, we find that there are clues about our personality within that space of joining. If we separate these different parts of ourselves, we have no intersection and we have no way of connecting these ideas together. But once we allow our different hobbies and our interests to come together, there is a gift for us in that intersection. And I'll start with a practical example here. So here we have a tale of two. We're not sure what they are because we tend to define ourselves by what we do, which is not always it's not the most efficient way of understanding or describing a person. We say, oh, I'm a physiotherapist, or we say I'm a baker. So, but when you're a baker, a physiotherapist who bakes, you know, which one are you? Your different hobbies begin to sort of compete with each other. But when we decide that actually the person who bakes and the person who's a physiotherapist are the same people, and if we look at it in a unified self, then we begin to start to identify common themes within each segment. So let's look at the example of Tenny and Tina. They're both physiotherapists and they both bake. Now, if we look at the left-hand side, you see that Tenny is measuring sugar. And Tenny is measuring sugar very precisely. The recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of sugar and Tenny is doing it the right way. You measure it in a measuring spoon and it says, you know, it's always 1 level tablespoon. So you take the edge of a knife and you shape the top off so that it's 1 level tablespoon. Now, let's assume, I mean, environments shape our behavior. There are so many things, maybe the way we learned how to bake might shape our behavior, but let's just imagine that this is actually Tenny's inclination. Maybe she was taught a different way, but this is just how it's settled with Tenny. Tenny wants to bake in this particular way, and he decides this is how he wants to bake. He measures every single thing, measures flour, measures everything with precision. Now, is it possible to borrow from baking and move it to the academic field? Can we move it to the ward? Can we begin to look at Tenny's desire for precision, for exactness? Can we relate Tenny's desire for certitude, certainty with some of the frustrations Tenny might be experiencing on the ward? Maybe sometimes if it's a chaotic environment, Tenny might not get the best out of Tenny in a chaotic environment. You can't give Tenny 2 patients to clerk and then stop and change your mind 30 minutes afterwards and move Tenny on to another patient. You might not get the best response from Tenny as you would from another person. And Tenny will begin, when putting these threads together, can begin to see associations and parallels between certain things. Sometimes when we're in a very stressful and demanding academic environment, We might not see, a drowning person might not even see water, they just see panic. But when you're able to take something pleasurable, something like baking, and you look at it introspectively with reflection, you're able to see, who am I? What do I really enjoy? When this is me when I'm relaxed. How can I recreate this environment when I'm studying? So Tenny might then begin to understand that, oh, I have a very low tolerance for variation. I like things to be steady. So Tenny might decide I probably need to get to the ward quite early, get my patients, collect them before anybody gets there, so that I can manage my environment to the best of my ability, because I know that this is how I like to operate. And in terms of working with other colleagues on the ward, Tenny is probably the classmate that everyone criticizes for being too fastidious and too stiff. Yet it's Tenny's notes everyone will copy, because they might be the most precise person, they might be the most exact person. And in terms of a weakness, Tenny can say, well, understanding myself and having reflected and with this self-awareness, I understand that I might need to be a bit more flexible and patient to accommodate my team members who might not be as precise and as exact as me. So this is where the unification of a self, the unification of all the different parts of it, can shed light on other things and other interests in the way we do things. Now, if we look at Tinu on the other hand, we look at Tinu, and Tinu is sprinkling the sugar. I mean, what's that phrase? They say, you sprinkle until the ancestors whisper enough. So Tinu bakes, Tinu looks at the recipe, eyeballs it, yes, okay, about a cup of sugar, okay, about a cup of flour, okay, about, eyeballs it, mixes it together. The recipe never comes out the same. It's always different each time, and it's fine. And sometimes the recipe is a waste. Sometimes the cake comes out really badly. And for Tinu, this is absolutely fine, because Tinu might be a flexible person. Tinu can take on an unpredictable challenge. If you give Tinu 4 patients to clerk and 45 minutes later you come and say, stop, go to the next ward and clerk 3 different ones, Tinu just moves on. Tinu moves on. So having this kind of reflection and this self-awareness that comes not from the word, it comes from baking. You realize that you actually have a gift between this intersection of very strong interests. So Tinu might now understand that actually I spoil the recipe sometimes because of my flexibility. However, I'm willing to try new things. I'm experimental. I like to find things out. I'm actually quite curious. I'm not so fearful that I'm so concerned about being safe. However, as a weakness, Tinu will realize that, but if I do have a task that requires precision, I need something to do with medication, I need to write precise notes, then I make sure that I schedule these precise tasks at the strongest part of my day, at the time of day when I'm most alert, because I know this is not my natural state. So I have to schedule this in a particular way when I'm at my best. And then Tinu will understand, working within a team, that I'm flexible. So the gift is people like me because I get on with things, but people might get frustrated with me if I'm not pulling my own weight in terms of precision. So baking, that seems so completely different from clinical life for physiotherapists, ends up being something that gives us a clue to who we are. So I mean, these are generalizations. It doesn't, environment matters. It doesn't always follow. You might be a very precise baker and be a very flexible physiotherapist. I'm not saying these things are definite. It's not a hard science. It's actually something that you look at iteratively. It's something you experiment with. It's something you play with on this journey of discovery that is yourself. And the most important thing about the self-awareness and the self-reflective process is we look at these different parts of ourselves and we say, okay, if I'm a precise person, does this serve me? How does this serve me? Do I need to change anything about it? What is the benefit of this? So the benefit is always things can be changed, they can be improved, they can be worked around, they can be valued for the skills and the benefits that they are. So we find new information at the intersection between physiotherapy and baking. We find information about Tenny and Tinu. We find information about them which we would not have found if we had kept them separate. Because we brought them together, we find new information. I'm going to play a video, and the video is on It's a video that I put together, and I superimposed. In this picture, there are 3 images that are superimposed. In the background, we see the picture of the protesters, the EndSARS protesters at Lekki Tollgate. And in the foreground, it's a picture depicting Okonkwo from Chinua Achebe's book, Things Fall Apart. And I'm curating a series for Things Fall Apart, for the African Writer series. And the first book in the series was Things Fall Apart. So as sort of the videos, I was trying to look at ways in which Things Fall Apart expresses itself today. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but Okonkwo is portrayed as every man. He's a classic hero. And the classic hero who is every man in literature is usually somebody who is never a perfect person. Okonkwo was a violent man. Okonkwo had a temper. Okonkwo was also a very strong person, a very, very dynamic character. And the characteristics of an everyman is that even though they make mistakes and they're not perfect, and Okonkwo did some horrible things in the book, however, we are able to see ourselves in them. So in my opinion, I could see Okonkwo in the EndSARS protest, and I found new information about the link between these two things that are very different, published in 1962 with the African Writer series compared to something that happened in 2020. So I put this together, and the audio is I'm narrating a part of Things Fall Apart, where Okonkwo is explaining the things that happened to him during a very, very terrible harvest year.
Okonkwo planted what was left of his seed yams when the rains finally returned, so he would make a fresh start. But the year had gone. Rain fell as it had never fallen before. For days and nights together, it poured down in violent torrents and washed away the yam heaps. Trees were uprooted and deep gorges appeared everywhere. And the rain became less violent, but it went on from day to day without a pause. The spell of sunshine, which always came in the middle of the wet season, did not appear. The yams put on luxuriant green leaves, but every farmer knew that without sunshine, the tubers would not grow. That year, the harvest was sad, like a funeral. Many farmers wept as they dug up the miserable and rotting yams. One man tied his cloth to a tree branch and hanged himself. Okonkwo remembered that tragic year with a cold shiver throughout the rest of his life. It always surprised him when he thought of it later that he did not sink under the load of despair. He knew he was a fierce fighter, but that year had been enough to break the heart of a lion. Since I survived that year, he always said, I shall survive.
So that was the intersection between Okonkwo's story told 60 years ago and an event that happened last year. And there are similarities, and there is a message of hope within within the story of Okonkwo told so many years ago. So the intersection between things that seem to be unrelated then bring new gifts. So I have another example, and you can write in the chat if you have any ideas about this. Now, this intersection I'm looking at, this is this is football. So this is now, ABH 5-a-side Saturday morning, and you have people playing, or you're playing the School of Nursing, you're playing football. Why? Why are you playing football? Why are you playing football at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning? Why would you not be doing something else? Wouldn't you be better off sleeping? Wouldn't you be better off just resting, doing absolutely nothing? Is there nothing on television? So why would a student prefer to play football? Now, it's a seemingly silly question, but it's a very important question. When we look at the intersection between things that seem to have no relationship with each other, when we say that there is no difference, things that seem like they have no bearing on each other, when we look and we put them together side by side, then we begin to see there is something each can learn from the other. So why are we playing football? Is it that we like the team? Is it the camaraderie? Are we there to laugh? We like the laugh because we'll all end up with bloody knees, we'll end up with blistered toes, some might end up in A&E for a short spell the same day. So why are we there? Is it for revenge against whatever loss happened the previous week? Are we thrilled by the competition? Are we thrilled by the idea of winning? So your clues to your personal motivation also lie in that intersection. If you can figure out why you can play basketball at 9 o'clock in the morning instead of sleep, you might begin to hack into what motivates you. And when you begin to understand what happens at that intersection, you can actually engineer other parts of your life to simulate the situation, to simulate the environments that make you function at your best. You might find some people prefer solitary sports, some people prefer team sports. You can ask yourself, what do I enjoy about this sport? Is it the team? Then if I'm in a slump academically, is there something about a team that might bring me together? Am I better off studying in a study room with other people as opposed to being by myself? Or vice versa, if I find I prefer to always be by myself, jogging by myself, or doing all sorts of solitary physical activity by myself, why the solitude? So you might find that you're not doing very well in a busy, loud reading environment. You can pick things up from other parts of your life and use them as clues to bring out the best in yourself. So some of these associations actually take a little bit of thinking, like to jump all the way from baking to the ward as a physiotherapist. It's a huge jump. But the good thing about it is that this type of thinking is thinking that we're already familiar with in science. In the clinical field, it's the root cause analysis. This is second order thinking. Second order thinking. It's the type of thinking that does not look for the easy answers. It's a type of thinking that looks beyond the current assumptions. It's the type of thinking that says, we're going to break things down and we're not going to stop at the first answer. We're not going to say what caused this morbidity and say, oh, it was malaria. After the malaria, we ask, what caused the malaria? And after what caused the malaria, we ask again, and what caused whatever it was that caused the malaria, until we get to a place where we can ask no further questions. Because if someone says that I like to play the piano, that is first order thinking. That's a first order hobby. Because the only reason you can say you like to play the piano is because you have seen a piano. But if you had never seen a piano in your life, you would still be the same person who you are, because whatever attracted you to the piano would still exist in your life. So beyond saying I like the piano, the next order of thinking would be, what is it about it that you like? You may end up with an answer that, actually, I am a person who likes solitary tasks that challenge me. Then you understand, you say, oh, no wonder I find my word rounds so frustrating and I prefer my reading time. Then you begin to see the actual strains, the thread that runs through you, the threads about your preferences and your inclinations. So when we move beyond, I like to bake, I like to play the piano, I'm a student studying this X, I'm a student studying Y. When we move beyond that and we move to the next order of thinking, we move beyond the assumptions that I'm a student and therefore I like to study. Leave all that behind. What is underneath? That's the second order thinking. It's hard, it's complex, requires unconventional thinking, but it is very rewarding. Because when we're able to do this, we're able to actually tweak our environment to suit our goals. And why would we want to do that? Because our energy is finite. If we understand the things that we like and the things that come as a challenge to us, then we know where best to use our energy. A lot of student life is based on copying whatever system seems to be working, or somebody is, getting a distinction, or the person reads, 12 hours a night and doesn't live in the reading room, so I will do the same without taking into cognizance your own personal preferences. So this is like energy that's just dissipated. But knowing where to dissipate your energy, where to conserve energy, then we're able to be more effective and more efficient in our unified life. So I have quotes from two professors, Professor Sophie B. Oluwole and Professor Chinua Achebe. They're both contemporaries, born in the 1930s. Professor Oluwole passed away, I think, in 2018, and Professor Achebe died in 2013. Now, they're talking about very different things, but they're actually saying something similar. So if we ignore the subject matter they're talking about and just look at their philosophy, I'll use this to illustrate some of what we're talking about, this second order thinking. Now, second order thinking, it rejects this idea of separation. It leads us to look into clues, to find associations. It makes us detectives. Second order thinking makes us detectives. We want to unravel what is going on. So Professor Oluwole said, was talking about the idea of reality, of cosmic reality and superstition. And she was a professor of African philosophy. So this was a matter she talked about a lot. And she said reality contains matter and non-matter. And she says in the West, these two things cannot go together. They are in opposition. So you can see that dualism already there. When people decide these two things cannot go together because they oppose each other, then what happens? They lose that intersection. So she says, well, the West said no, they cannot go together. So, but the African says yes, but it has two features, but they cannot be separated. So Professor Oluwole, she accepts this idea of we have different parts. Baker, physiotherapist, yes, there are these two features. They're separate, they're two, but at the same time, they're not separate. And she continues to say there is nothing that is absolutely material, there is nothing that is absolutely non-material, and in all phenomenons in the world, the two are there together. So that's back to that Irabo Emefi's painting with the red and the blue parts coming together. The two are there together, and it is in the joining of those two things that we have a unified picture. No longer it is, and I also believe it was repeated again in Arrow of God. Chinua Achebe used an Igbo proverb, which he translated as, wherever something stands, another thing stands beside it. It's wherever something stands, another thing stands beside it. So there is no exclusion. There is no, I am the me that is this and does only this, and that is separate from the me that does, other hobbies and other passions. It does not exist. And he was trying to explain in an interview he gave, and he said, when he was explaining what that proverb meant, and he said, there is no one way to anything. He says the Igbo people who made that proverb are very insistent on this. There is no absolute anything. They are against excess. Their world is a world of dualities. So which is this world that we must embrace, and even more so now in today's day where we can be anything we want to be all at the same time. We have to live in this world of dualities, and we must embrace this integration of all these different things about us, and understand that these things are there together. When something is standing, when I'm standing as a physiotherapist, the side of me that likes the baking is next to me. When I'm standing as a medical student, the side of me that sells and buys things, it's standing next to me. Wherever something stands, another thing will stand beside it. So when we use second order thinking, we reject this separation, and then we become these detectives that begin to find clues in the traits. So how do we do this? There are many ways we can do this. We look at personality. Personality is a major way of finding clues. Now, personality is not fixed. There are different types and traits. There is conditioning, and there is, of course, choice. So when we look at our personality, I mean, these are things we take, there's so many tests online. We take these tests with a pinch of salt. It's all about curiosity and not about perfection. It's more art than science. But you start asking those creative questions, that creative perception from the inside, when you begin to look at elements of personality that cross the different parts of ourselves, because that is the common thread that passes through. So there are many types, there are different types. There's Myers-Briggs, there's the Big Five personality disc assessment. I'm only going to talk about the first two. The disc assessment is a dominance, how dominant you are, how you persuade people, whether you induce people or you're submissive or compliant. The Enneagram is also a helpful tool. The four temperaments would be the sanguine, choleric, the phlegmatic. We also have the Gretchen Williams, the four tendencies, which sort of seeks to categorize the way we behave into things like whether we oblige people, whether we are upholders, whether we're questioners, whether we tend to rebel with everything. So the common method that we have is to pay attention. So when we're looking at personality, what are we paying attention to? Paying attention to the themes that run through our lives, the habits, the preferences, the learning styles. And I wrote flow state, not the crucible. We look at ourselves in a flow state. I mean, people like to say, oh, it's when you see yourself under pressure and under fire, that's when you know who you really are. And I disagree, because when you're in fire and all your, the adrenaline is rising and you're actually in really big trouble, the brain is no longer engaged. You are working based on reflex, you are working in survival mode. You are, you're almost reduced to the level of an instinctive animal, just trying your best to survive day to day. You're not processing information as well as you would in a flow state. So when you observe yourself in a flow state, when you're baking, when you're playing your instrument, when you're writing, when you're hanging out with your friends, when you're watching TV, what are the things you're attracted to? What kind of things are you interested in? These things are the things that begin to give us clues that we can carry over into other parts of our lives. So the Myers-Briggs really is based on different, the Jungian method, and the Jungian Carl Jung's categorization. It's extroversion and introversion, looking at how we are focused. Are we focused outwardly or inwardly? Where do we get our inspiration, our motivation from? Also, another way of classifying is how people take in information. Are they sensing or intuitive? How do we make decisions? Are we very practical thinkers, or are we driven by emotion? And then living external life, do we judge? How do we live our life out in the world? Are we judges? Are we perceivers? There's a lot of information online and lots of personality tests that you can do. It's a very interesting thing to go through, because a lot of it is, yes, anecdotal, and it's slightly stereotypical. So just, take it with a pinch of salt, and your environment also matters. But they give an interesting indication and help you to start to question things that can begin to help you. So with the curriculum review process, the question would be, does our assessment support these types? Do we look at the curriculum and do we say, does our learning environment support every single type of person? Or do we have a dominant type? Like, we know that countries have dominant personality types. You can say, the Germans stereotypically are more bullish. The Americans are more, capitalistic, go-get, aggressive attitude. We can say that in China, people tend to defer. So in every environment, there is a dominant type that tends to do well, but we need all types. So we then look at our curriculum, we look at the way we assess students, we look at the things we're asking. We say, are we setting ourselves up to support only 3 types of students, only 4 types of students? What types of students are we missing? Sometimes we may decide that the good student is the one who asks a lot of questions, then we miss the quiet ones, or we want the ones that are thinking outside the box, and then we miss the conventional people who are actually the bedrock of a very chaotic, busy environment. So it's good to see that, to look at the curriculum, look at our assessment, and look at the way we train and say, are we supporting all these kinds of personalities? Can we identify within our student body all these kinds of people? Because we need all these kinds of people to run a well-rounded service. Another type is the Big Five. And this is the benefit of the Big Five against the Myers-Briggs, is that this is actually graded like on a spectrum rather than the Myers-Briggs, which tends to be yes or no. So the ideas are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism. And people, the scoring puts you on a spectrum. And you know, people change up and down the spectrum. You change your behaviors and your traits with stress and your environment and whatever challenges you're facing at a particular point in time. But it's quite useful to look at it and begin to understand where you stand, and if you choose to change things, if you choose to try and look at the weakness of any particular situation compared to the strengths, you might decide to change different things in your environment to accommodate these particular personality traits. So someone who is more open would be more, will ask more questions, will be more willing to change, will be more open to new ideas. Whereas someone who's low on openness will actually prefer a more traditional method. One can begin to look at these traits and say, okay, in terms of our learning, openness as an organization, how open are we? As a college, how open are we? And what level of openness do we support? What kind of openness do we facilitate in the way we assess students? And we try to see if we are accommodating enough variation. There's an anecdote I read once about a headmaster of a primary school, of a secondary school, and 20 years after graduation, they met one of the old students met the headmaster, and the school had some very funny, very strict rules about hair for boys schools, very strict rules about hair. And he asked him, oh, you were very strict and you really cared a lot about hair. And the headmaster said, I never cared about hair at all. And he said, but the rules were very strict. He said, yes, they had to be. He says, because we have all kinds of students. We have the quiet students who need a big quiet library. So we built them a big quiet library. We have the students who rebel, not rebelling because they're awful people, but rebel because that's one of the tendencies. Gretchen, well, that's one of Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies. That is a tendency. There are the people who rebel are the people who always question the establishment. They are the ones who like to think of what could be. They are the idealists. They are the ones who champion social change. It is in their nature to rebel. So we decided to have the haircuts to accommodate them, because we know in advance that this is a personality type. We will accommodate this within our academic structure to give them something to rebel against, something not so serious, because we know that this is what they are like and this is what they must do. So we put that thing in front of them that they can rebel against. It's easier for them to rebel against haircuts than to rebel again with cigarettes and alcohol and other things. So we put these things in the way as part of the education process. As they rebel against the haircuts, they develop a philosophy about why should we have to do this? Why do we need to do this? Who makes them the authorities? They're building a philosophy about life. And because we understand there are different personality types, we put these things in place for each different personality type and how they develop. So the final idea is that what we see becomes a story. When we see these personality traits, when we begin to see the thread that runs through us, then we begin to create a story around it. And this story doesn't have to be fixed. We begin to develop a story that we can accept, we can deny, we can love it, we can change it, we can modify it, we can grow with it, we can evolve from it. When we realize that we have the ability to constantly govern our preferences and our styles, and in doing so conserve energy for the goals that work for us, then we are winning. Then we're able to use who we are to solidify our force. We're able to bring all the different parts of us with that common thread going through, and we're able to strengthen ourselves, and that helps us in our goals. And in the curriculum review process, that helps us as teachers and assessors to be able to anticipate the different kinds of students and make sure that our assessment covers and enables and strengthens all these types, so that we have a very, very well-rounded student body. So in the end, so we've talked about how creativity leaves clues about us within the intersection between our many parts. And we need these clues because they help us to be able to conserve our energy and begin to understand what we're good at and what we need to work on. So the two new ideas introduced was how to look for the common thread. The common thread is personality, the themes around our lives. And the fourth idea is that what we see becomes a story. And the method in which we attain all of these things by paying attention to the things that are within ourselves, the way we behave, our preferences, and our stories. So next week, well, not next week, we'll take a break. We'll come back again in January, but we will talk in the next session about framing our stories. When we see that whatever we see, whatever we perceive is our creativity and becomes our story, then we need to see how best we frame this story to a way that doesn't stifle us or chain us, but in a way that is always changing, always evolving, and helps us to grow for our greatest good. Thank you. So if you have any questions or any comments, just let me know. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Buki. Once again, for those who joined late, Buki Owosheni is a graduate of the, she graduated from the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan, and in the MBBS graduating class of 2004. And this is the second session in the series that she's taken us through, a creativity lecture series in search of the unified soul. Apart from being a graduate of medical school, Buki holds a master's degree in comparative literature and criticism from Goldsmiths University of London. And we can see that right through her lecture. I've been absolutely, really glued to my computer, listening intently and trying to learn more about myself and see how I can be a better administrator, a better teacher, and make sure the curriculum process is gets the right start and continues appropriately, and we can cater to all our students in their different learning sites and its types. We all know, I mean, she has said so many things about creativity's perception, creativity must be turned inwards, and she's given us 6 sessions, 12 ideas, and 1 method. Please, there are a couple of questions in the box, and we will look at them. But I think one of the things I thought about that was that I am a kind of Tinu. I've never had recipes, never. You know, a couple of, my daughter is always, I think my daughter had some friends over at different times. And just a few days ago, she said one of her friends was asking, oh, can you tell me about your mommy's mincemeat recipe? People are always asking me for my recipes. I've never had recipes. I just throw things in and I calculate with my mind's eye, and everything turns out different each time. And I think maybe that's why I'm able to survive in Nigeria, because there's too much chaos in this country, honestly. But I'll come back to this, but let's take a few comments and questions. There's someone called Jibola who's been saying to everyone, adapting, please write your messages in the chat box, adapting the message to the audience. Creativity finds its origins in paying attention, in self-awareness. You may want to comment on that. It says it's important to understand the whys for the various facets of the self and find the intersection of these parts. And then, as Mr. Delacroix says, could you further explain on attaining the state of mind that instigates second order of thinking. I think that's thinking outside the box. How do we get people to think outside the box? I've always associated thinking outside the box with creativity and innovation and bringing back. And in our curricula, really, in our methods of teaching, do we encourage our students to think outside the box? Or do we just want them, to do a role of rote learning? I know that with raising my own children, and they were privileged to do both the American exams, the SAT, the IGCSE, and the WAEC. And I remember my daughter telling me that, Mommy, WAEC was hard, but all you need to do is to cram. I'm serious. She says you cram, and then you just give back exactly what you have been taught. There's a marking scheme, and if you go anything outside the marking scheme, you'll be in trouble. So, but she said IGCSE looks a bit, but you need to think. You need to think. And also the SAT, you need to think. So those are some of the issues, and that I think that's what Mr. Adelakun is asking about. And also some of the things you said about, do we cater for all the personalities? Some students are very, very verbal and very vocal. And I must mention, I did a research work many years ago looking at performances. And I found that in the basic sciences, the boys tend to outperform the girls. But when we moved to clinical school, the girls outperformed the boys. And girls are better communicators. So how do we prevent those sort of things? And then of course, how open are we to accommodate variety as a college? So those are some of the questions. So Buki, over to you just to have some more reflections. And thanking you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Adelakun. That was a really good question. Attaining the state of mind, for me, it's one big thing. And I think the one big thing is the ability to suspend judgment, the ability to hold on before making a decision. There is this phrase, it says, no idea is good the day it is born. So when you begin to ask the whys, if at the first why, the answer is rejected, or the answer is considered as inferior, or the answer is considered as not good enough, then that whole process is aborted. Second order thinking it's stifled by judgment. But if we're able to suspend a judgment on whether something is good or bad, and all these good or bad, there are also artificial separations, there's also dualism involved in it. That's a good idea, that's a bad idea. There's no such thing as that, because everything falls on a spectrum. There's gray in everything. So when we start this second order thinking and we're asking, why do I like baking? We suspend the judgment, because the medical student who is baking might be feeling guilty that they bake in the first place. I should not be baking, I'm wasting time baking. So no second order thinking will even come from that space, because I shouldn't even be doing it in the first place. It's a waste of my time. I should only do it when I'm at home during the holidays. But if we suspend that judgment, we're able to say, it's not good, it's not bad, it's just a thing. Let's look at it and begin to ask the whys without having to judge. Then we're in a position to begin to have a model of higher thinking, because we don't stop the process halfway.
Thank you very much, Buki Owosheni. There's a comment that says, can we have a recording of the lecture, or better still, can we stream the entire lecture series to the college YouTube channel? Mr. Adedayo, are you there? We're going to, the first lecture is already ready. So we will put it on the college YouTube and share the link and the lecture series as we go along. We will, certainly, because I think it's very important for us to start reflecting on how we're doing things, why we're doing things, and to start to think of how can we move on and provide more holistic. Sorry, somebody's in two places at the same time. Those are so, yeah. So how can we, really bring out creativity that births innovation? And like you really said, many times when you're doing something that's not sitting down in your books, you're feeling guilty. True. Because that's the way we've been trained to think. If you're doing sports, hey, I'm wasting time. Or you're doing your music lessons. And interestingly, the person who has posted that request is none other than Dr. Wale Adebi. And we all know that Wale Adebi is a cardiologist. I don't know if you know him, Buki, but he's a cardiologist here. But at the same time, he's an excellent organist. He's an organist and I know he plays all over the place. And he's also very much into IT, information technology. You know, he's really helped a lot with developing the College of Medicine's information technology system that we have in place. So you can see that's somebody that's multi-talented and with a lot of creativity and innovation. But how much do we appreciate, even as faculty, how much somebody who's multi-talented, how much does that come to play in the promotion guidelines? You know, we tend to focus on the people that are writing papers, those who are sitting down in one place writing. They may not even go to the field to do any field work, but they get the data and they are writing and writing. And those are the people that really get rewarded in the university system. Yeah. Whereas those who are doing a lot of other things, creative works, building, innovation, you know, that takes a lot of time and are very meaningful, may not necessarily get rewarded unless they're able to develop a patent, you know. So those are really very interesting. But thank you so much, Buki, for getting us really interested. There's a couple of, there's Dr. Okechukwu Oga, who is also a cardiologist, says, well done, Buki, for the excellent lecture. And then there's somebody called T. Umo Bari, who says there's gray in anything. Yeah, I like those quotes from the writers. And I really love this session, really beautiful. And we're looking forward to having you again in the new year. But we will put up these YouTube sessions so everyone can participate, and enjoy and digest all you have been feeding us with. So once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Buki. Thank you, everyone. I can see the e-learning chair is also online. And also, thank you so much. Oh, Chooks is there, Dr. Mobowale, and all our wonderful people, Bolahon, Obajimi, and so many people have joined this session. Thank you so much. And we're so excited, looking forward. And Dr. Babalola has been here from the onset. And there's somebody called Akin Deko online, and so many people. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and God bless you. Thank you.
Bye.
You can put on your video. Yeah, Buki, you have a few comments. Yes, thank you, Buki.
Yes, just thank everyone for coming, for listening, and I hope everyone got benefit from it. Thank you very much.
Yes, and we're also hoping that Buki would come on particularly the biomedical communication, and also any other faculty, and give sessions, be an integral part of what we're doing in the College of Medicine right there from London. And when things are a bit more settled, I know she would find time to come home.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I know this is a bit private, but while people are going off, I know you were a priest's wife. Your husband is a vicar of a church, an Anglican church. How do you put all these together? How does the tapestry weave? Being a wife of a priest, sorry, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. Being a medical doctor, being a creative writer, how does everything tie together?
I think a lot of these sessions actually stem from my own personal struggles with being so many people all in one person, and it didn't seem to be coherent. So, like you said at the last session, how you said you did psychiatry because that was the only thing that seemed remotely artistic, and that was the road I would have gone as well. That was my favorite. That was the only thing I enjoyed in school. I enjoyed psychiatry because it was the only thing that wasn't certain. There was room for ambiguity, and there was room for interpretation. There was room for creativity in psychiatry. So it's just my journey as well, trying to put all these parts of things together. Thankfully, in the United Kingdom, being a vicar's wife is not the same as it is in Nigeria. The challenges are definitely not the same. It's not two for the price of one. So I just support him just normally in the way I can. It's not too heavy a burden. It's not too heavy a task on my time. It's more of my creative interests, my writing, and working for reading the African Writer Series project that just I juggle together.
So thank you, everyone. And you can all put on your videos as we all exit and say hi and wave, and let's see you all, everyone.
Hello, ma.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
A couple of people are speaking, but we really can't hear you. Okay, then. Bye, everyone. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Bye. Oh, bye. Rita, you should speak some French about your creativity.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, Buki. Bye. See you again.